Hello. Today we're going to talk about the future of what happens when we can send AI models as much data as we want. Google released Gemini 1.5 to sort of public view, and there's a lot of different changes. I think one of the biggest changes for us and sort of this conversation is, of course, this massive context window. They're able to kind of bring in a lot of video, hours of audio, lines of code, a bunch of words. The other kind of major change that they're talking about really is you can upload a video kind of as seen here. This is a video of like this guy's kind of bookshelf. And it was actually able to pull out a lot of the kind of different books that were on that shelf and put that into a JSON format with the kind of authors included here as well. So this is like, pretty incredible. But we've been kind of disappointed by Google before. So the other thing I kind of think about in relation to all of this is like, okay, yeah, they've got a bigger context window, but what does that really mean? Just a quick primer for sort of like what a context window is. Really, you've got this available space that the LLM can kind of operate in. Any of these AIs, ChatGPT, they can operate sort of within this window. So when we're talking about like Google Gemini has 1 million tokens available, that means that they can put a lot of context in this window, a lot of documents, a lot of things to reference, right? You then give it a question about that document. Say you read a book and you want to understand like, hey, give me a summary of this book and find these detailed points that I kind of need for a report or something like that. If it has a larger context window, it can actually go through a lot of this book and kind of find that. Previously, what we had to do was something called retrieval augmented generation. Effectively, we would kind of break documents into chunks, ask a question, find chunks that we thought were relevant using some sort of search or kind of vector search. And then we would be able to put those kind of documents within the space. So it's a really big deal if we can actually like store all of the related info in one space. The problem with this is that kind of what we've seen when we look at like this needle in a haystack analysis is like a lot of that context could potentially be lost, especially the larger these documents get, the more likely it is to sort of lose some of that context. Jeff Dean of Google DeepMind went through this haystack test and actually really showed that for video, audio, and text, that sort of context window remained very accurate. It didn't lose context, didn't lose pieces of detail in the document as that document size got very big. This sort of shows that like Google's onto something here. This kind of Gemini 1.5 is a really kind of powerful change. But what does that change mean? If we are kind of like looking at this space and we're kind of thinking about like what's possible here, retrieving details is kind of one part of it, but there's also another part that I think we need to consider. And this goes back to actually like one of my favorite papers. In this paper, they have a entire town that's sort of being simulated. All the kind of peoples of this town are going through kind of their day to day, and they kind of needed to remember like where all these different locations are. Of course, they need sort of this like working memory that they can have here, but they also had to sort of like remember things over time, right? They developed plans, looked at sort of like their goals and objectives, and tried to understand like what they were trying to do. So the ability to sort of like get information, retrieve details from that information, and act is like one part of it. But the other aspect is this really like ability to sort of like plan or like reflect. And I think also like if you're thinking from like a research context, it's like synthesize understanding, right? So like what does that mean for us is like each of these documents, there's sort of two pieces of it. One piece is this haystack ability to retrieve specific facts, right? This ability for us to put any detail in a big document and pull that data out. But the other aspect of this is really like the ability to have complex synthesis or reflection over that data. For us to ask a more complex question, for example, summarizing a book, yeah, there are all these details, there's all these like people who have gone through these like struggles, but like, what does this mean? What are the overarching kind of messages that are being said here? Or how can I apply this against this other body of work? You could compare details, but really it's more about a synthesis, a reflection, a kind of multi-step process. So that's the question that I have is like, are these AI models capable of doing that? And I think that's a place that we're going to see a lot more research as we kind of go forward if this context window is actually truly able to expand this heavily. The other thing is retrieval augmented generation. We have a lot of data. 1 million context window is pretty incredible, but we can fill it. There's plenty of data out there. There's tons of books, tons of things that we want to reference. And we know that retrieval augmented generation produces better, more accurate results. So how are we going to like still use retrieval augmented generation? I think one way I could think about it is really like we're going to have small embeddings throughout large chunks of text for us to be able to find relevant articles, relevant books, relevant, chapters, right? We're going to load in the entire like chapter, section, even book based on that sort of similarity to what we're talking about and put that into the context. We already kind of see that sometimes today where we're actually embedding like per sentence, but I think we're going to see this more where kind of the current retrieval augmented generation we're doing today, where we're doing like paragraphs, that may actually sort of remain. And then, we'll actually be pulling in the chapter if we get a hit on like that paragraph being something we're pulling in. The other thing that sort of like remains to be seen about this too is like, how do we command these LLMs? If we have this massive context window and we're trying to compete for control with the LLM, how do we understand that? How do we sort of train these LLMs to think about the right details? We want these documents to help guide how the LLM thinks or provides feedback, right? But we also don't want them to ignore our commands. So there could be this situation where you have like a command PDF, say you've got like a prompt history of all these different prompts that you like using, and then you've got your actual prompt that you're using. How is it going to know not to be prompted by these PDFs and to only be prompted by your command, especially if those PDFs look a lot like commands? How do we control this, right? How do we not open ourselves up to prompt injection? How do we not open ourselves up to all sorts of like weird scenarios where we actually lose control ability of these LLMs? That kind of like leads us to this sort of like two system approach where really you have kind of one part of the system that may do memory and like large memory retrieval. And then you may have another part of the system that actually acts on that memory retrieval. So this part may pull together summaries and facts and details that might be relevant. And this side may actually use that as a kind of a smaller, more focused LLM that's more controllable. So I think this is going to have a major impact to how we think about building applications. There's a lot of more like complex solutions that are now possible. And this is a really exciting time to be in this space. There's so many like ideas and thinking about how this has changed. So many people are competing to like build and solve like all the right problems. But every time we sort of solve a problem, we're now having to shift our perspective and kind of think about this problem in a different way. Google Gemini is really impressive, really powerful, but we're still sort of having a hard time understanding how to really leverage these LLMs. And we're still kind of hitting these interesting roadblocks that are so novel and sci-fi in a way. It's just a really fun time to be in this space. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching the video here. If you want to find out more information about us, we're Stable Discussion. We've got a blog here on our Substack. Recently, we talked about dropping ChatGPT to explore other options and some new projects that we've kind of been building around AI art. So you can kind of go check out things there, find out more about kind of what we're doing there. Also, would love it if you liked and subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much.